Back in the early 2000s, I began to notice subtle shifts in my wife's behavior. Nothing overtly alarming at first, but enough to spark a quiet unease that I couldn't shake. Our children were still very young, around 4 and 6 years old, and they had begun mentioning, with increasing frequency, their visits to my wife's parents. At face value, there was nothing suspicious about that. After all, they were her parents, and grandparents often play a role in helping with child care. But what puzzled me was the sheer regularity of these visits, 2 or even 3 times a week, despite the fact that her parents lived nearly an hour and a half away. For someone who only worked a part-time job, this level of travel seemed excessive. I decided to confront her about it, gently at first, but she dismissed my concerns. Her denial wasn't particularly convincing. I knew her well enough to recognize when she was stretching the truth, and in this case, I could feel the deception hiding in her voice. That was when I began keeping a close eye on her vehicle's mileage. Week after week, the numbers confirmed my suspicion. She was driving hundreds of extra miles that couldn't be explained away by work or errands, around 400 miles more each week. Still, I had no definitive proof, only a sinking feeling and an unsettling hunch. Then, one quiet afternoon, fate intervened. I sat down at our family computer and found a sticky note left beside the keyboard. Scribbled on it, in her handwriting, was her AOL password. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, got the better of me. I logged into her email account. What I found changed everything. There were numerous email exchanges between her and her best friend from college. The tone was casual, almost gleeful, as they discussed her ongoing affair with a former high school boyfriend. There were no specific identifiers in those messages beyond one particularly nasty detail. My wife mocking the man's wife for gaining weight after childbirth. Her words were cruel and callous, and the betrayal they revealed hit me like a punch to the chest. I printed the emails and stored them away, knowing I would need them later. But emails weren't enough. I needed solid, indisputable evidence. I reached out to a trusted friend in law enforcement, who referred me to a former cop-turned-private investigator named Ron. I hired him on the spot. I gave Ron everything I had, copies of the emails, the information I had gathered, and he took it from there. Ron was methodical and precise. Within weeks, he had built a case more detailed than I could have imagined. He followed her movements, documented times and places, and captured photographs of her clandestine meetings. The report he compiled painted a clear and damning picture. She would drop our kids off at her parents' house, meet this man for lunch, check into a low-rent motel with him, spend a few hours there, and then return to pick up the children like nothing had happened. Armed with this evidence, I hired a divorce attorney. I came from a broken home. My own parents had both cheated on each other, and the chaos that followed had cast a long, dark shadow over my childhood. I swore I'd never put my children through that kind of trauma. Cheating wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage vows. It was a deal-breaker on a moral and emotional level. I also asked Ron to dig into the identity of the other man. He delivered once again. The man's name was Bob. He was married with 3 kids and held a lucrative position as vice president of sales at his father-in-law's company. That piece of information intrigued me, particularly the implication of how much he stood to lose. Once everything was in place, I set the final phase in motion. On the day my wife was served with divorce papers at her workplace, I had Ron pay a visit to Bob's wife. She had no idea what her husband had been up to. I gave Ron copies of all the evidence, the photographs, emails, the full report. She deserved to know the truth, and what she chose to do with that truth was entirely up to her. The fallout was swift and brutal, for Bob at least. According to public court records, Bob's wife immediately drained their shared bank accounts, took their children, and left him. When she informed her father, Bob's boss, of what had happened, Bob was summarily fired from the company. Their home, which had been owned by her parents, was taken from him as well. He was left jobless, homeless, and alone. Things spiraled quickly. Bob reportedly tried to confront his wife, leading to a heated altercation that resulted in her brother breaking his nose. Police reports followed, along with restraining orders, criminal charges, and eventually jail time. Bob vanished after that. I've never been able to track him down, and no one I know has heard from him in years. Last I was told, he had moved out of state, leaving the wreckage of his old life behind. As for his ex-wife, she rebounded impressively. She joined her father's business and later took over its leadership entirely. She turned her pain into power, something I deeply respected. On my end, the divorce was painful but clean. My ex-wife and I maintained a strictly functional relationship for the sake of our children. I never spoke to her about the affair again. Now that our kids are grown, we have no communication at all. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. But the only concern I have for her is in her role as the mother of my children. Beyond that, she is a closed chapter in my life, one I no longer revisit.